What is going on, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Time Killers podcast. My name is Neil Rivera, and once again, I am joined by the man who has probably impaled more pyramid heads than anyone that I know personally, Mr. Matthew Field.
I don't know about pyramid heads, but there's definitely a lot of, red flowers that I've tread across.
That was, of course, a nod to Matthew, who is here to talk to us about his time playing Silent Hill F. I had to Pyramid Head was like the first thing that came to mind, so it's good to kind of get that out of the way, that they're not really a major factor there. Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us again. It's been too long, in the sense that it's only been 2 weeks, but we've got another banger of a show lined up for you guys. I've been playing Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. This is the latest, obviously, from Retro Studios and Nintendo, finally here after a really long, troubled development cycle. And then, like I mentioned before, Matthew is here to talk about Silent Hill F, which released earlier this year, but has received quite a bit of attention and focus with the Game Awards coming up. So, and then on the close of the show, we are also going to sort of tease out, speaking of Game Awards and end of year stuff, it is that time of year, top 10 season. So our next episode will be our top 10 Game of the Year countdown. And so, yeah, we'll sort of tease out what we want to get done the rest of the year, and sort of tease the state of our list. So yeah, let's just jump right into it, Matthew. Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. This is, of course, the Nintendo Switch 2 and Nintendo Switch 1, Nintendo Switch exclusive. It originally began development with Bandai Namco in partnership with Nintendo. It was announced in 2017 with that partnership. Nintendo said, hey, this isn't looking too great, and then they rebooted it in 2019 after a 6-year delay. After that point, it's finally here, Metroid Prime 4, and I'm about halfway through it. I'd say at this point I'm a little bit more than halfway through. I'm probably like 3/4 of the way through it, so I've played a good chunk of it. In terms of like my history with the franchise, Metroid Prime specifically, played the original on GameCube, have sort of touched on all of them, throughout my time playing games, but I only beat Metroid Prime for the first time when the remaster came out. So it's one of those things where, like, I was kind of younger when the games came out, got frustrated by like the whole Metroidvania thing, just having to like backtrack and remember, constantly looking at the map. It's a series, Metroid Prime specifically, that I've sort of grown up and matured with, and sort of like the older I've gotten and like the more like complex video games I've played, I've grown to love the franchise quite a bit. And so, yeah, with 4, honestly, like my headline here is that it is an excellent Metroid Prime game that does try some new things to mixed results. So I think there's a couple of different ways that we can go, I think, in starting this conversation. And I think I want to start with the biggest additions, because, there's been some that have caused quite a stir. I think there's this game, being a Metroid Prime game, I would say, not having followed the franchise like super intimately, I would say this one has seen its biggest share of like sort of controversy and like, back and forth in terms of like, differing opinions between fans. And so, yeah, talking about the additions here. So there's 3, what I would say, sort of big additions that this game 4 makes to sort of the core Metroid Prime formula. And so that's the semi-open hub world, which I'll kind of get into a little bit as we talk, as we talk more about it. But then you're navigating this hub world with a motorcycle bike. It's called Viola. And so, it's kind of like these semi-open segments. I sort of equate them to like Hyrule Field in The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. So in true Metroid fashion, right, you've got all these different biomes. You got your frost biome, you've got your lava biome, you've got like the more like jungly evergreen one, right? Like you have all these different sort of environments that you're exploring and collecting power-ups in. But where Metroid Prime 4 sort of looks to switch things up is by adding this sort of hub world that connects all of them. And there's story reasons for it. And, I think ultimately, there is more of an open world push behind this game. And I think that's sort of where the mixed results fall for me, where it's like while I'm navigating this open world in between like the actual Metroid Prime like levels and puzzle solving, it feels very undercooked. But I see the potential there, right? Like it's definitely it's a big open space. There's some activities to do, not a lot, just a couple of, like a couple of little side, activities, some shrines, like if you're familiar with like a Legend of Zelda, how they've been doing the shrines, kind of similar to that. And yeah, so I mean, ultimately, like, I think to start with the open world, I feel a little bit let down by it, but I kind of see what the potential is there.
So
with
yeah,
it.
let's dissect that a little bit, because that's one of the things. And to start here, I'll go over my background here with the franchise. I am a total outsider to the series. I have never completed any Metroid game, and the only game I have sunk any amount of time into was Metroid Prime Hunters on the DS. Didn't finish
the
it.
Classic.
Yeah, it was good. I liked it. But I didn't finish it. So as Metroid, like the true like mainline Metroid Prime series, I have no experience with. But from the outside, I've always observed them to be something that is a series that is not interested in following current trends. It's interested in kind of just doing what it wants to do. It's, it has its obviously, its own Metroid, genre that it founded or sort of founded, or at least, helped to popularize. But with this, so when you talk about the open world here, does this feel something like they're going against their series history in order to kind of conform, versus like an open world take similar to Breath of the Wild or something, where the developer says, okay, well, this is maybe what the mainstream, where the mainstream is headed, but we have a unique take on it. So how do they? What do you think their vision is here, and how well do they deliver on that?
So yeah, I mean, I think to answer your question, I don't think it's quite at the Breath of the Wild level. In terms of like, I would say don't go into Metroid Prime 4 expecting like, okay, I've heard of these games, I've, touched on them, this is the sort of big next step evolution. I with my headline, like I really wanted to lead like, this is a Metroid Prime game, right? Like outside of the open hub world, which like up until the halfway point, I hadn't really spent a whole lot of time in. Well, yeah, I guess that's the point that I was trying to say. It's up until the halfway point, I hadn't really spent a whole lot of time in the open world. I was still very much doing the traditional Metroid stuff. That being said, I'm kind of glad you brought up your history with the franchise. Kind of mentioned that you hadn't really touched on it. I think you are the core, like who they are targeting with this game, because I would say, and this is kind of a good segue into some of the more controversial elements, this game has NPCs, and so if you're not familiar with Metroid games, Metroid Prime especially, they are traditionally very solitary experiences. You are Samus, you are a bounty hunter, you end up through circumstance, one way or the other, stranded on these sort of like alien planets. And it's all about this sort of like slow, methodical exploration. You're using the scanner in conjunction. Like it's not so much a shooter as it is, like obviously a puzzle game. So you're using that scanner, you're really trying to develop, like learn about like the environments. But yeah, this one adds NPCs, and like it feels like I find myself going back to like a Halo game a lot, where it's like you have people kind of in your headset talking to you a lot. I think there's some gameplay design decisions, and I mean to get back sort of to the open world stuff. I'm kind of all over the place thinking about this now. I don't think it's like a huge step or a huge evolution forward. I think it's, they have some interesting ideas. I don't think they fleshed them out as well as they could have. I think where the game struggles is just the overall density in terms of the open world parts. There's just not a lot to do. You're driving around on this bike and you're like smashing green crystals, which at least based on what I've read and seen, like they do play a role like in terms of like the end game, but it's really just like mindless, smashing these crystals, collecting them and just not thinking about it. Like I said, there's a couple of puzzly things out in the world that you can do. Later on in the game, enemies will start attacking you while you're on the bike. So like, it's not quite as boring and as lonely. But yeah, I mean, like the open world part, like I can see where they're trying to take it. But it just didn't quite get there, at least in 4. I'm glad they did it. And so I guess to kind of touch back on like the NPCs and sort of some of the other elements that they've added here. I mean, I think a lot of it is sort of like quality of life based. So I mean, when we think of like a Metroidvania game, right? Like you're thinking, I'm constantly checking the map. I'm constantly backtracking. Oh, I've reached this obstacle. I don't have this power or ability for it yet. Let me get it and then come back and like, oh my gosh, now I've got all these different sort of like paths that I can sort of take. And I think one of my frustration points with both Metroid Prime and just those kind of games in general is that they don't give you a lot of direction. It is a lot of like scouring the map for like a missing pixel. And you're like, oh yeah, like that's a door, like that's a path. And like, it's a lot of guess and check in that sense. And I think where the NPCs, one positive that I can shine on the NPCs in this sense is that they take away some of that, but not to the point where it becomes a cakewalk or it kind of takes away like the core of what Metroid is. Now, I think I think there are people who are going to be upset about the fact that Samus is being spoken to, by other people, which is just traditionally not a Metroid thing. But I think for what they did and like sort of how they used that to sort of make it a more approachable experience for someone who hasn't maybe played Metroid Prime 1 through 3, I appreciated it, from what I've played.
I mean, so you said that I'm like the target here. Like by that, do you mean that this feels like sort of a series reboot to try to attract newcomers that haven't played the others? Like in that regard? Or, I mean, do you feel like you'd gain something from this experience if you went back and played the other 3? Because I considered playing this, but it didn't feel right to me to play this without having the history of at least playing, the Metroid Prime remaster that came out a couple years ago.
No, yeah, I think you can totally jump in. I mean, granted, I'm not like a Metroid lore sicko. There is I would say one of the more rewarding parts of this game is, this series is, with the scanner sort of getting the backstory and the extra, it's essentially like a codex system or like a, picking up notepads in an open world game, right? Like you're just kind of getting more detail and more fleshed out, like things, you're getting more explanation as to what's going on this planet, because historically, you're not being delivered the story in like a more like traditional way, right? Like I do think this has more of those trappings where it is like, you have more cutscenes and you have dialogue and like, like I said, you have people like kind of in your ear talking to you. I wouldn't say that it's a series reboot. I think it's them saying like, okay, we're at the 4th one at this point. And, I think that kind of, I can kind of touch on the like overall from a gameplay standpoint, like there's nothing truly new being done here other than like that semi-open world area and then the inclusion of the NPCs, right? Like once you get into the levels themselves, it is Metroid Prime and it is good Metroid Prime. Like it is like the level design is great. The puzzles are really good. Like I feel like I've been kind of weirdly negative about this game, but like overall it is, I mean, like, when I say it's an excellent Metroid Prime game, like these games are, have sort of revolutionized and changed the industry, right? Like I think it's an interesting place for it to be in now because of this long delay and, a lot of the back and forth with Bandai Namco now back at Retro. But, ultimately like these have been Game of the Year contenders in the past. And I think this one, for the most part, it kind of stumbles, here and there, but I think for the most part, it lives up to that pedigree.
Yeah, and so that's the other thing I wanted to say is, so I mean, this for those who don't know, this changed developers back in 2019 because the original progress was not proceeding as Nintendo expected. Do you see kind of the seams of where that, shift happened? I mean, we just early this year had Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 come out and was overall negatively received for, a lot of the changes that were evidently made in the change of developers there. So do you think that, I mean, for the long delay, do you see the evidence of that delay, or do you see any kind of positive or negative effects of having such a huge gap between the last entry? And do you think this is now set up in a way where we won't see such a long delay for Metroid Prime 5?
Yeah, I think to answer the second part first, I think, Metroid Prime 5, if and when that comes out, I think will be a quicker turnaround. And yeah, like I've thought about this quite a bit, right? Because I think initially I was really turned off by the open world segments. And I think as they've sort of layered on more abilities and, more things to do in that world, I've sort of warmed up to it. But, yeah, I mean, I definitely think that was where Bandai Namco was initially pushing, was to like, let's Breath of the Wild eyes this, right? Which, like I hate using that sort of comparison point, but like, let's really sort of change the formula in a way that is sort of drastically different. And I would wager a guess and say that it maybe was just getting a little too ambitious for what it was. Like I said, when you're in the world and you're driving around, it's hard not to feel a little let down by it. But I mean, I constantly keep thinking like, okay, yeah, like the ambition was there. So I fully believe that they can pull something like this off in a future game and, just kind of give it more stuff. Like, I kind of alluded to the shrines. I'll call them the shrines. I think they might actually be called shrines in the game. But essentially, they're just kind of like these, shrines that you can stumble upon. It's like a small Metroid style puzzle, similarly to the shrines that you would find in like a Breath of the Wild, and you get like your usual like upgrades and stuff. And like I think had there been more stuff like that, not necessarily the 900 or so shrines that they packed in Breath of the Wild, but a decent amount. I think there's only like a handful of them in the open world. I mean, like you're talking like just barren desert and dunes, and like maybe an enemy will come and attack you. So like I think I can imagine at the point where Retro came back, they're like, hey, like we have essentially a really good open world game that feels nothing like a Metroid, and Retro was sort of brought in to sort of like flesh it out as a Metroid Prime experience. And to their credit, like I think they did two things really well. Like the Metroid Prime stuff, excellent, phenomenal. Like can't say enough good things about that. But they also used, I think, what was done previously, or like kind of like they didn't do so much of a hard pivot where like it feels like two different games. I don't think that every person that plays Metroid Prime 4 will agree with me on that, but I think ultimately like the open world stuff stays out of the way enough. And they gave it enough love and attention to sort of feel new and novel, while still making sure that the core experience was really good.
Yeah. Last question that I have on this is, the last Metroid Prime 3 came out for the Wii, I believe. Is there any like Switch 2 or even just Switch in general hardware kind of quirks to the way this game plays? Like are there any good functionality of the unique hardware offered by the system?
I haven't touched, I knew I should have tried it out before we recorded this, but I've been hearing really good things about the mouse controls, just, on the Switch 2 overall. But Metroid Prime 2, the Switch 2 edition does, have like allow like a mouse control option. And yeah, I mean, I think the biggest sort of, thing that you will notice as far as like the Switch 1, Switch 2 versions is just, I mean, the Switch 2 version sings, man. It's, I mean, like you're greeted by the traditional, like, do you want quality mode and do you want performance mode? And quality is literally 4K 60 and performance is 1080, 120 frames per second. So it's like they really leaned into, and I think that's another thing that I haven't really touched on, both with Metroid Prime as a franchise, but Metroid Prime 4 specifically, is that they were really, really gunning to make it, like, it's probably the best looking Switch. It's probably the best looking Nintendo game, period, ever released, right? Like it's something, and this is something that I probably have never said for a Nintendo game, where it's a technical showpiece for the system, where it's like the lighting effects are really good, volumetric fog is there, the reflections on Samus's suit, and it feels like they know what they had here too, because even in the cutscene direction, man, like there are just these sort of long pauses where they're like, yeah, you want to take a screenshot right now, don't you? You know, and like it's like, I mean, I would say from a Switch 2 hardware perspective, like you're really seeing the, you know, like the load times and the frame rate, and like, I mean, it runs well, it runs great, it you know, plays, like I can't say enough good things about just like the nuts and bolts like gameplay of it all. And then yeah, the technical performance I would add in there as well. You know, like with all Nintendo Switch games, there's compromises, right? Like you get, you know, a little up close to some of the textures, and it's like, oh, that doesn't look so great. But, you know, I think overall, especially in handheld mode, like it looks awesome, it plays awesome. And so, yeah, I mean, I would say it is worth the extra $10 if you are looking for, like, I would say it justifies the $70 price tag easily.
I mean, yeah, I guess that's another question I've kind of had about this, in that, like, I hear everybody that is like, I've read a lot of reviews, and everybody seems to say this game looks like fantastic, but I think there's a certain element of it that just does not come through to me in screenshots and like little clips I've seen. And that's not uncommon. You know, it always looks better when you're playing it on your local hardware. But I mean, if you were going to
Metroid's never been a series that's like been carried by its art direction either. And so that's why, like, I made sure to say like technical showpiece, because like I don't think it's the prettiest game that Nintendo's ever released. You know, like Donkey Kong, you know, Bonanza was amazing. Like looked, you know, like artistically amazing. But yeah, I think from a technical, you know, like I get the same sort of feeling playing this and looking at this, like I did when I first saw that first Halo 2 trailer, where it was like, oh my God, like this thing is running on a Switch. Like where it's, you know, I would say it's probably, you know, an Xbox, you know, series level kind of game, Series S, you know, quality in terms of like the visuals here. But, you know, it looks and runs great, especially in handheld. But you were saying something, I cut you off.
No, that's basically it. Like, yeah, like it looks good, but if, I mean, you know, we grade, like we've talked about before, we grade Switch games on a bit of a curve because of the hardware. So like, I mean, yeah, you're saying this looks basically like a Series S type game, even though the Series S is not going to match the performance specs that you mentioned for this. Like you're saying visually, from like a fidelity perspective, it looks pretty similar to what you would imagine a current gen game looks like on the S.
Yeah, I wouldn't. Yeah, I mean, like Halo is a pretty good comparison point for me. Maybe not Infinite, because that had a little bit more open world, but like, you know, the sort of linear, you know, like Halo 5, I think is a great comparison for this game. Not necessarily, you know, making any sort of comparisons in terms of like how I feel about the story, the characters, the writing, and all that stuff, but like just in terms of like the style in which it's delivered, it is very much more of a linear campaign. But like, yeah, visually too, right? Like it is, you know, an early, you know, like an Xbox One, a late Xbox One game. But yeah, I mean, it looks, you know, yeah, it's easy to kind of get caught up in like the sort of like the nuts and bolts of it all. But like when you are playing it, especially in handheld mode, you know, and it's running, like, I think that's the thing too, is that like, it's probably one of the first, or like, it's probably one of the few games where like, I never felt like I was compromising when I was making that quality versus performance. Like I was getting what I wanted, both with, you know, with the quality, setting. So yeah, I mean, I think, you know, obviously given the hardware limitations, and, you know, I'll be interested to see what like a Resident Evil 9 looks on the Switch too. But like, you know, for a first party, you know, Nintendo game, like it looks great. It's definitely worth the, like I said, definitely worth the $70 for, you know, the extra $10 for the Switch 2 with all the bells and whistles.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I heard that good things about the Metroid remastered, that it looks good on the Switch as well. Would you say this is a major step up from what they delivered on that?
Yeah, I agree. I would say so. I'm a little bit biased because I played the remaster on a Switch OLED, whereas like this one doesn't have like that handheld screen. Like the handheld experience is a little bit worse in my opinion. But yeah, I mean what it makes up for in pure power totally. There is one more thing I want to touch on before we move on to break. And that is, I've touched on the NPCs a lot and, like you are being spoken to as Samus a lot. There's one NPC in particular that caused quite a stir during the preview season. And that's one Miles McKenzie, who is just a lovable, goofy, Federation Force, soldier who, I think he gets a bad rap. Mainly because, I think another thing, like one thing we have to remember here is that this is Nintendo. So like everything, like all the dialogue in this game, despite it being sort of a more serious, darker, edgier game overall, it's still very family friendly. Like he's not like, yes, he's annoying, but he's annoying like in a way that like, a kid is annoying. Right. And that makes it sound a whole lot worse than what it is. He's fine. Like I honestly don't, like similarly to the open world stuff, he's there for like the first hour and he definitely makes a bad first impression, but as the game progresses you kind of just find yourself going back to him to get these upgrades, and I think he's mostly fine. Like I think there's some genuinely good like writing there. Like I think there are some laugh out loud moments. I think there's plenty of times where I roll my eyes too. Overall, where I come down on him specifically is like, if you have a problem with him, but you don't have a problem with the way some of the Dispatch characters are written, which I'm interested to hear what you might have to say on Dispatch now that you're playing it. Like, I think, ultimately, like, there's a problem there, right? Like, cause I think he's tonally in the same vein as like most of those characters in Dispatch. He's just not as raunchy and, making dick jokes 24/7. He's just kind of like the, hey, yeah, I'm here to help you. Like, like whatever you need, Samus, and like, there's kind of like a running gag with all the NPCs that like Samus doesn't talk. She's always, like they're always sort of like cracking jokes about it. So I think they have fun with it. I think the other NPCs are definitely less offensive than Miles McKenzie. They're very much, generic archetype, prototypical, characters. But I think, their inclusion is not like the end of Metroid Prime as we know it. So, I kind of like their inclusion. The more I play, I'm like, oh yeah, like I kind of like the direction they took with a more like sort of linear narrative, campaign, but without, obviously like taking away too much from those like quiet moments of exploration. So I think they struck a good balance.
Yeah, you have to kind of wonder why they made the decision that they did to include those, right? Because I don't think you get the backlash to this without the series history. Like if this was if this was unburdened from the expectations of the series veterans, I think this is probably not even noteworthy, really. But it is interesting to consider why they made the decision to add them in when they know the series history and that they're long-term fans, what it's been praised for in the past. Do you think it wasn't primarily in service of streamlining some of the elements that you talked about, like the backtracking, like, a built-in hint system or?
Yeah. I think that's 100% it. I think there are some, to be clear, Miles is the only character that sort of serves that purpose. There is, I'm in the late game and I just ran into another NPC that has actual utility, which is something that I hadn't seen up until this point in the game. And so like, I still think that like their inclusion is ultimately a net positive. But yeah, I think the main sort of driving force there was to make it a little bit more accessible, because Miles, I think he embodies that, where there's, when you're out in the open world, and I think at any point you can like radio call him and he'll give you these sort of vague hints. So that's when I say like they do a good job straddling the line, he'll be like, hey, you might want to go check out the volcano, and that's it, like he doesn't give you, like, it's not like, Horizon Zero Dawn where it's like, oh man, I really got to check this, like pile of bone, like really specific hints.
Right.
it is very much like, hey, yeah, you should go check out, this place. You should go back to the snow biome, or hey, and it is very like, even beyond that, it is just like, hey, yeah, like anytime you get a new power, like go check out the other places you've been to and like, see what's there. And like, it's very much geared towards people who may not be as familiar with the gameplay, systems and the way that the levels are set up there. So, similarly to just Miles as a character, you can engage with that stuff as much or as little as you want. So, I think ultimately, like I said, it was a net positive on the game. It's not something that like I'm sitting here like, oh man, Metroid Prime 5 better have like a fully fleshed out cast of characters, but at the same time I didn't hate it to where like, oh man, like they better take it out. So I think they tried something different and it worked for the most part, and I'd be interested to see if they try and replicate it given the feedback that they've gotten. But yeah, count me as one of the like not pissed off Metroid fans.
Yeah, as always, it'll be interesting to see what kind of feedback they take from that, and whether they lean into it as a stepping stone for something in the future, or if they backtrack. I think if the open world shift is any indication, they'll probably maybe flesh that part out, and you might need some more NPCs in order to do that effectively. So it sounds like this is moving into a new direction, and maybe the next one will be a little bit more clear as to where that ends up.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the two developers, definitely didn't help that. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see if Retro comes back for Metroid Prime 5, like from day one. I don't really know what the full story behind Bandai Namco initially taking over was, but yeah, I mean, if everything shakes out and it's like, yeah, Retro's back, we're doing Metroid Prime 5, and like, yeah, I think that would be the top of my list, would be, let's flesh out this open world. I think they could keep the same structure, having it be a hub in between, because it's not the main focus. The main focus is going into these areas, exploring, fighting enemies, picking up the upgrades and all that. So I think as long as it's just like a nice change of pace, it doesn't have to be this huge sprawling open world. I think there could just be a couple, I think they could just add a couple things here and there to sort of, really make it more, just as compelling as the rest of the stuff.
Yeah, I will say this conversation has me a little bit more interested in playing this, because I do love a messy game that's kind of like got hints of some ideas that are maybe not fully fleshed out. Like I like that in a game. So maybe when we hit a little slow patch in the first part of the 2026, I'll go and play this and maybe the original Metroid to catch up on the series, because I am intrigued for sure.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I would definitely recommend it, especially to someone who traditionally has stayed away from these games or hasn't enjoyed them, because I think there are some additions and changes that should speak to you. But yeah, I mean, yeah, not to give too much away of our top 10, but it's a late entry, I think, into my list, where I definitely, there were some, and yeah, I don't want to give away too much, but, it definitely, the more I played it, I started having those conversations you start having of like, am I enjoying this more than game Y? Am I enjoying this more than this? And it sort of has crept its way onto my top 10 list, by virtue of that. So, yeah, that's Metroid Prime 4, y'all. Nintendo Switch 1, Nintendo Switch 2. If you are a fan of the series, I think there is stuff for you to enjoy. And if you haven't touched it before and you're kind of like on the outside looking in and have any sort of interest in it, I definitely think this entry is worth it as well. But yeah, y'all, that's going to do it for the Metroid segment. We're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, Matthew is going to tell us all about Silent Hill F. And we're back. Matthew, the Game Awards, we're recording this on December 9th. The Game Awards are in just 2 nights, and nominated for Best Narrative and Best Performance, among other things, is Silent Hill F, which I think a lot of people had you asked them beginning of the year, like, hey, not only is a brand new Silent Hill game going to get announced, but it's going to get nominated for Game Awards. Chances are they'd be a little bit shocked. So Matthew, tell me all about your experience with this. Were you shocked? What do you think about Silent Hill F overall? And, I guess before that, give me your sort of history with the franchise and what led you to pick it up at this point.
So, I don't have a long history with the Silent Hill franchise. I was a little bit, there's a lot of parallels here to what we talked about with Metroid. We were a little young for these games, probably even more so with Silent Hill being slightly more mature than Metroid. When the original 4 games came out between 99 and 2004, those were all really well regarded, but I didn't play any of them just because I was too young. I always really heard good things about Silent Hill Shattered Memories on, I think that was the Wii, I think.
Yeah.
Wii originally, and then ported to other consoles, but never got around to playing it. And so my first actual Silent Hill game that I played was, if you can consider it that, PT in 2014 when they were gonna, reboot it there. And that was a Silent Hill game. It technically was, yes, despite its short length and free nature. It was technically in the franchise. So, and I loved PT as much as the rest of the internet did, and was disappointed that we didn't get a full release of it. And now 11 years later, we actually have the next Silent Hill game from a new developer, a new writer. And
yeah, so this is Neobards Entertainment is the developer here, and you called this out in our prep, but this is a guest star writer. So can you talk about like the sort of like development setup here?
Yeah, for as much as I understand, it is a new developer, as you mentioned, that is pretty untested. Like if you look at the list of Neobards, releases, they have done a lot of co-developments and ports, but the only games that they have fully developed on their own have been like a Resident Evil multiplayer spinoff, and actually that might actually be it. If you exclude remasters and ports, I think they've only developed like multiplayer games prior to this, which is crazy to think about. And then they have a guest writer, which is not sure I'm going to pronounce this right, but Ryukishi07, who's known for writing some visual novels and, I think manga. So I have not read, or I wasn't familiar with him at all, but I know he's well regarded within the Japanese horror space.
So it's a franchise that we haven't played a whole lot of. It's a new entry in the franchise after over a decade off. It's an untested developer. I'd say a well-known but more or less like little-known writer. So like all of this is sort of shaping up to be a recipe for a disaster. Is it a disaster?
It is not a disaster. Shockingly, I was, the whole time it was consistently surprising how much not a disaster it was. I've completed the first playthrough. Small spoiler: this is a game where there are multiple endings that you cannot get them all on the first playthrough, which is typical for the Silent Hill games. I do intend to go back to get some of the other endings, but I haven't yet. But yeah, this game, I think its inclusion in the Game Awards is very much deserved on the narrative front. I think this game takes narrative swings, using some thematic elements that you just don't see other moderately budgeted games take in the industry. Like this is doing some rare things, and it's doing it pretty well. There's some obvious metaphors for things that you encounter when you're going throughout the game, but not everything, like you may think you have some kind of like theme figured out and like, oh, I see what they're doing here. You know, I see what this horror equates to or whatever. But there's always some kind of twist or something that they introduce right after that to kind of keep you on your toes and make you guess at what they're doing. So it is definitely in rarefied air when it comes to just the swings that it even attempts to take with its narrative.
And I imagine a lot of that has to, and this, speaks to sort of what is drawing me to it. I picked it up for a little bit and ultimately bounced off of it. So I'm interested to see or hear what you have to say about like the sort of gameplay, the moment to moment gameplay specifically, and like the level design. But I mean, overall, like, from a narrative and like the themes, speaking on that, I imagine a lot of this is like the setting and the time period, right?
Yeah, without giving too much away, because I do think this is something that is worth experiencing kind of blind, the way I did. It's set in, I think, 1960s Japan. You play as a female protagonist who has a not great home life, is going through the changes that you go through when you're a teenager, lots of emotions, jealousy, having crushes on people, like... just dealing with the fact that you're no longer a kid anymore. There are undertones and societal norms that you were now expected to conform to, especially for women. And it kind of uses that as a jumping point to get into real deep psychological horror territory.
That's cool. Yeah. And so, I mean, like obviously the performances, the setting, but I mean, it seems like, with the inclusion of like this guest writer and sort of like his, like, I mean, I imagine like the themes and sort of like, the visuals, like from a visual standpoint, like, does it like, I imagine it's, I don't know where I'm going with that, honestly.
No, the imagery is a key part of this. Like the red, I think there's spider lilies that are throughout all of this game and spread. And even, beyond the horror elements, just the rendition of this world, it's got a level of detail that makes it feel very lived in. And to kind of pivot to one of the other points I wanted to make here, I think they're able to produce that level of detail because of the linear nature of the game. This is contrary to Metroid. This is not a game that attempts to go open world at all. This is a very, it is a PS2 coded game. Like it's like the series forebears. This is a game that is extremely linear. You're doing some backtracking, and it is. I think it's probably better for it. It does not attempt to transform the format of the game when it doesn't need to, and when it is already in a form that is going to serve its story better. I think about kind of like, Mafia: The Old Country this year, which we talked about earlier this year, where it uses tried and true gameplay mechanics as a base as a jumping off point for its narrative to actually take center stage.
Cool. Yeah. And I mean, I think, that sort of lines up with my very limited experience was that, it definitely seems like it's a very PS2 coded game. And I think really a lot of where I noticed that was in the linear level design. But this game is doing something that in my mind is pretty unique for, I won't speak for a Silent Hill game, but certainly, Resident Evil, other sort of third person horror games, is that it's entirely melee weapons here, right?
It is, yes. Yeah.
So how does that work? Like how does the gameplay work? Is the combat good? And then like what does the upgrade system sort of look like? I think of something like Dead Space where you kind of drip fed, different weapons and upgrades. And is there still a level of that here, or is it less pronounced?
The combat system is probably the element of this that I am most conflicted about. On the surface, I like it. I liked it a lot early on, but I think as the game goes on, I mean, this is a game that took me, I was pretty thorough in exploring areas, and my first playthrough took me under 15 hours. So it's not extremely long, but even at that length, there's enough combat to where I don't feel that it evolves quite enough to really justify how much of it there is. I think there either needed to be less combat and you can leave the system how it is, or leave the amount of combat the way it is and introduce some additional wrinkles as you go on. Now, for people who've played the game out there, they do know that there is one particular wrinkle that shows up like at the very end of the game, basically, but it's deployed almost more as a gimmick, really, than an actual mechanic that you get to use and like explore the limits of.
So then, like, you know, I imagine there's like an upgrade system. What do the upgrades look like? Is it just increased melee damage? Is it like very basic stuff?
You don't get really any upgrades for your like combat. So the way the combat, the way the upgrades work here in general is that you're finding offerings, or you're finding just like items that can be used as offerings, which is kind of an interesting twist, at the save points for this game, which are these little shrines. So you take like this offering that you found, and you convert it into faith, which is like just your experience currency, and you can use that to increase your health, your stamina, or like one other thing that I'm forgetting.
Yeah. So it's like RPG light.
And that's it. Yeah. But the way that this is doled out is that you're increasing each like 3 times a run or less. So you're not getting a whole lot of improvement throughout the single run. Oh, the other thing you can increase is you have like charms kind of in a Clair Obscure type mold, where you know, you will, it'll either impart like a unique effect, or it will just like give you a stat bonus or something, depending on which ones you equip. And you can add more slots to how many you can equip.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, I think that's enough, right? Like, I feel like based on your description, like it does just enough to sort of, and yeah, like I saw a lot of comparisons to like Souls games, as you do. And that sort of confused me, but I think hearing you talking about like just how much combat there is, I can kind of see why it would elicit those, especially when you talk about the shrines and like it elicits like the bonfires and points of grace.
I'm on record on this podcast saying that I think the Souls-like moniker is extremely overused, and so I would not classify this as a Souls-like. I think this is just a third-person melee action game from a combat perspective. There are, you know, the only Souls-like elements you have here is the fact that it employs stamina and there's like a dodge. Like there's no block here, so you're not even parrying and doing any of that. Like you only have a dodge, so it's very light mechanically. And again, I think that works. If I was having it my way, I would just include fewer combat encounters. I think. Yeah. You know, at the beginning of the game, when you're just starting to unlock the combat and you don't really have very many good weapons or anything, I think that's when the game is at its best in terms of like the horror balance and the combat balance. Yeah. The game is never as scary as it is like before you get to fight back, basically. And that's true of all horror games, but it's especially pronounced here because once you start getting, you know, building your weapon arsenal and everything, it does lose a lot of the fear factor.
Yeah. And I can see that. And I mean, honestly, it seems like there's more of a focus, not so much on the horror, but just more so the themes that they're going for, the story they're trying to tell, the really the emotions that they're trying to evoke. And it seems by all accounts that they've achieved that. So
100%. Yeah. I mean, if for me, as someone who's not a horror genre fan, this is like the ideal scenario. I would prefer having the psychological horror and the spooky vibes versus like jump scares, which there are a few here, but it doesn't lean into that. I wasn't like terrified throughout my entire playthrough or anything like that.
Well, interesting. I might have to give this another shot because I definitely didn't play too much of it, and I definitely bounced off of it, but I definitely enjoyed the setting for sure. And to kind of echo what you're saying, like the level of fidelity and just detail in the world was really, really eye catching. And like, I mean, even the combat from what I played of it was like, there's a weightiness and like, in a way that you don't really see in horror games. So yeah, I think I might want to give it another shot. I don't think I'll be able to give it a shot for my top 10 list of the year, but not to put you on the spot, Matthew, is this making your top 10 list? Is it being considered?
It is. And I will say, I mean, I've talked mostly positively here. There are a few things that kind of graded a little bit. I'll just rattle them off real quick. I think the map here in this game, while it's really nicely drawn.
Oh, terrible.
It's not good. And it's especially bad because it shoots itself in the foot even further, because when you're moving through a section or like moving through the map, the first time she'll mark, like the character will mark off like X's where paths are inaccessible. Yes. Well, then if you're going back through that same section again, the X's are still there, even though those paths may have opened up. So there were multiple sections where I'm looking at the map, having explored everywhere that I can go, and I see nothing but X's and I have no idea where to go. And turns out I had to run over to one of the X's that was already there to clear to see that the path is now open. And there's no sort of like, marker or anything indicating where you're going to go, where you're supposed to go. So those sections end up feeling a little more frustrating than they should. And the other small thing I'll mention is that some of the puzzles kind of fall into the territory of like, okay, I'm in this house. I need to, like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I have to pore over every single inch to see what's going to be interactable in order to find out what to do. There's not too many of those, but especially later in the game, there were two particular areas where I could not figure out where to go, and I had to run around and do a bunch of backtracking until I could see a prompt that I missed on my first time through. So, that's also when we talked about the PS2 coded elements of it. That's a part of it too, and that's on the negative side. But all in all, they're pretty minor things. But yeah, to answer your question, it's definitely in consideration for my top 10.
So what you're saying is, on the nitpicky gripes, had you had a Miles McKenzie there to walk you through and like just tell you like, no, actually, like the X is on your map, like go check them out, it would have made it a better experience for you. What
Absolutely.
You're saying is that we should have Miles McKenzie in Silent Hill now.
Yeah, I mean, if they can make that happen, I think that would be interesting to see.
Well, cool, y'all. That's Silent Hill F. Very interested to see what it does at the Game Awards. I mean, it definitely seems like, this is Claire Obscure's year, but I would love to see a weird, cool little horror game go in and steal some of its thunder as well. It's PC, PS5, Xbox Series X and S. It's everywhere. And yeah, go out and play it and enjoy it. Matthew, we've been talking a lot of top 10 stuff here, and that's because the next time that you and I convene to record, we're going to be going through our top 10 lists
That's right.
of the year. It's hard to believe that we're already at the end of 2025. I kind of had like a moment of reflection, booting up what I'm calling like the last game that I'm playing for consideration here, and I was like, damn, like the year's almost over already. So yeah, we wanted to just, before we close out the show, just kind of not only tease that we're going to be doing an episode counting down our top 10s. Look forward to that. It's going to be awesome. But just kind of wanted to convene here at the end of this, do a little housekeeping and check in, see like, how's your list coming along? Is it solidified? Is it rock solid? Is there a lot of movement? And then what games are you looking at playing over the next like week or two, or at least jumping into trying out to see if anything, makes the list?
Yeah. So my list is, I think there are about 5 games that are locked, I would say, on my top 10. I haven't really gotten down to the order yet, but in looking through the games that I've played, there's 5 that really stand out to me so far as ones that they will definitely be on the list. And then for the other 5 slots, I would say there's a good number of games that I could fit in there depending on how I'm feeling that day. So I think this is probably going to be something that I'm considering all the way up until when we record our lists.
Yeah, what's a game that is really like you're thinking has a shot here that you wanna get to and look at?
Well, I want to play Routine. I sat down. I was gonna try to play it to talk about today, but I didn't get a chance to. So I've only maybe played about 30 to 45 minutes of Routine. I really liked what I played so far. And then it's just about kind of going and finishing up games or revisiting games that I played earlier in the year to make sure that my recollections of them are fresh. So I want to get back to, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. I want to go back and finish Citizen Sleeper 2, which I've started but haven't completed.
Nice.
And yeah, like you mentioned earlier, I'm playing through Dispatch now for consideration, which I'm getting pretty close to being done with.
Well, cool. Yeah, I won't put you on the spot and ask you to give me thoughts on Dispatch, in the hopes that maybe we talk about it next episode. I will be straight up and say that I will not be talking about it because it's not on my top 10 list. However, yeah, I mean, related to, my top 10, I feel like my top 5, maybe my top 6, I feel like it's a lock. Like I've done, I think more so than any other year, a lot of like, how did I really feel about this? I really questioned my rankings a lot. But similarly to you, I think these next couple weeks, I want to go back to, I think the one that really sticks out to me in terms of wanting to go back to is Clair Obscur, because it's one of those that I know is going to get a lot of love, and it's one that I remember loving a lot when I played it, but how much I loved it is very much one that I've gone, back and forth on. So that's one that I think I'll revisit, at least, kick the tires on and just remind myself. But in terms of games that I want to get to and play, this little indie game called Unbeatable just came out today, and it is like, I mentioned it previously on the show, but it's probably the most Neil coded game to come out this year. So I think it would be foolish of me not to try and blow through it and see if it'll crack the top 10. I don't know if I'll be able to get through it in time to do it, but we'll see. And yeah, I think there's things there that I want to be careful about, like with recency bias, and I don't want it to come in and be like, it's my game of the year and I played it 2 weeks ago.
It's tough. Yeah, it's tough to keep that, it's very different to compare a game that you played 9 months ago to one that you just finished a week ago. It's really tough to, because games, like you're talking about Clair Obscur, like the way I think about Clair Obscur has certainly evolved since I played it. It came out with all the hype and the way I have thought about it and what I enjoyed and didn't enjoy about it over those months, has really been something that I've considered, and you just don't get that when you've completed the game so recently. So it's a challenge every year, but yeah, always a factor.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I did this thing on, Blue Sky this year where, like many other people, as they beat games, they've got their thread of games that they beat this year. But with me, I was trying to, give them like a rating, and, really looking at my top 3 games of the year. All of them I rated 5 out of 5. So it's like, okay, well, what's the difference between this 5 out of 5 and this 5 out of 5? And that's where you really get into splitting hairs. And so like, yeah, like, that's where it's like, I think any other year it's like a no doubter that Clair Obscur is my game of the year, but in a year where there's such just a deluge of so many good, unique, and just like really high quality experiences, like it's really hard to like definitively say one way or the other. For sure, yeah. But yeah, guys, that's we've got game of the year to look forward to. Like I mentioned earlier, the Game Awards are this week, so we might be able to do a little bit of recap between now and then. And yeah, guys, that's lot to look forward here. Lots to look forward to here as we close out the year. But yeah, that's going to close out our show for tonight, guys. We're glad that you joined us and hung out with us to talk about video games. Go play Metroid, go play Silent Hill F. If you haven't already, please please subscribe to us on whatever podcast service that you're listening to us on, or if you're listening to us on YouTube or watching us on YouTube, subscribe to us on YouTube. If you go to timekillerspod.com, you can find all of our social handles. Follow us on any social media accounts that you use. And yeah, don't forget to share us and tell us, share us with someone who loves video games, and just have them, we're trying to build a community here. So we're glad that you guys listened, and we look forward to talking about our top 10 list with you guys on the next episode. Matthew, is there anything you want to say before we log off?
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays, y'all. Have a good one, and we'll see you on the next one.